We're starting tonight's session in the big blind, and we look at ace, ace, king, deuce, suited to the king straight away. Sitting on $11,000, we face a late position open to $75 and a call on the button, and decide to make it $300 from the big blind. Now, ace, ace, king, deuce with a king high suit is right on the edge between calling and 3-betting. If we were 100 big blind deep, these aces and almost any other aces are a fist pump 3-bet because at a reduced stack to pot ratio at 100 big blinds effective, we can pot most of the flop textures and we don't have to deal with the realizability of our equity for turns and rivers in out of position gameplay. This is different though. Now, as we're deeper stacked, we do care more about playability, and our ability to make the nuts or draw to the nuts pre-river becomes increasingly important. Therefore, ace-ace king deuce could also be a flat. At the end of the day, it's a close spot, and 3-betting is certainly fine. If your opponents are quite passive post-flop, it could make sense to 3-bet because they're not going to put a lot of pressure on you after you flop a 1-pair holding. If your opponents are bluffy and thinking players and they're not afraid to put a lot of chips into the middle with marginal hands, then calling pre-flop and keeping the pot under control might be better. Both of my opponents called the 3-bet, and we're heading to a flop. The flop is Jack 5 deuce rainbow, and this is a good texture for my range. It's going to be hard for my opponents to outflop me unless they flop 2-pair or a set, which is relatively unlikely. What's important about betting aces here is that you want to have some sort of blocker to your opponent's value range, like a jack, a 5, or a deuce, or additional equity in the form of a straight draw or a backdoor flush draw, or ideally both. My hand qualifies here because we are actually blocking pocket deuces, 5 deuce, and jack deuce, so our hand wants to bet. It is important to notice that only 60% of our aces are supposed to bet the flop here because not all of them appreciate building a pot. Our only bet sizing used here will be small, in this case 40% of the pot, because we're not looking to limit ourselves to only bet very strong hands and then check the rest of our range and allow our opponent to realize their equity. So betting small in multi-way pots is absolutely key. So based on those core concepts, we end up c-betting the flop here for 40% of the pot, which is $375. Now, the player in the black shirt is a very experienced, strong regular, and is anything but money scared. He actually covers my $11,000 stack. He goes ahead and raises to $1,300 in position. The button gets out of the way, and now it's on us. Ace-ace king deuce is actually supposed to be a fold, which I didn't know in time, but our hand is not strong enough here to continue. Even though the player in position is supposed to raise 60% of bare jack X, like Jack 9 8 7 for example, our hand is supposed to fold at this point because we don't have the required back-end nuttiness to justify continuing here. Our hand has a very hard time continuing against the second barrel on the turn and almost never makes the nuts on the river. If we had the same holding with 2 backdoor nut flush draws, then our hand would actually be a call. But in this case, I decided to make the call and see a turn card. The turn is the queen of clubs, and I quickly check. I would only have a leading range on the ace. My opponent checks back though quickly. I would have checked for the turn, and now on the river something interesting happens. I actually thought I had ace, king, king, deuce. Yes, it does happen to all of us, kind of embarrassing, but I do admit it here, but it would not have made a difference. I think both hands, ace, ace, king, deuce, as well as ace, king, king, deuce are checks by the river because we don't have a 9 or a 10, and we're also blocking our opponent's hero calls. Opponent checks back and announces 2-pair. I announce a set, realizing I didn't have a set, but then end up, unfortunately, slow rolling his 5 deuce with my king deuce. So yeah, this happens to all of us at some point. So he shows 5 deuce. I didn't see the other hole cards, but we ended up rivering the best hand. As mentioned, I think we should bet fold the flop in hindsight, and it's a good start into the session. In our next hand, we open raise king 9 7 5 suited to the king in the cutoff. This is not a typical RFI in the cutoff, but on the button. But in this particular setup / lineup, I felt good about it because the players behind me weren't 3-betting much, and the blinds were also quite deep. The small and the big blind both make the call, and we're heading to a flop. The flop is king 8 6 rainbow, and we absolutely smashed this board. We flopped top pair and a nut wrap, as well as a backdoor king high flush draw, and as both of my opponents check, we make a $200 bet. The big blind calls, and the straddle gets out of the way. We're heading heads up to the turn. The turn is the jack of spades. Not really the card we were hoping for. And in real time, I decided to check back and take my free card. However, the solver disagrees and wants to go for the pot-sized double barrel, and I thought about it a little bit more, and now I understand why. If we are ahead on the turn, our hand can still generate tons of value against other straight draws that we dominate. For example, 8-7-5 or 6-7-5, 10-9 combos with an 8. We have a better pair, and we still have quite a few nutouts. On the other side, if our opponent has bare top pair like ace-king, for example, or king-queen, it's going to be very difficult for him to continue against a pot-sized double barrel on the turn. And then lastly, as we are this deep, if my opponent doesn't have pocket kings, we shouldn't ever see a check raise on the turn. And as we have a king, we're blocking the check raising range significantly. For all those reasons, we should actually double barrel pot instead of taking the free card. However, I decided to go the passive route and check back. The river is the queen of clubs, and we didn't connect here to our desired straight. Our opponent goes ahead and makes a check, and this is actually not a good river to be bluffing. We don't represent ace-10 very well after betting the flop, and even 10-9 combos that are good enough to bet the flop are usually double barreling on a jack as well. So our hand doesn't really qualify for a great bluffing hand. We need a 10 or an ace to justify bluffing, so we do check back and actually lose against king-8. In our next hand, we pick up ace-6-5-4 double suited in the small blind. It's a nice looking hand. And we see a raise in the cutoff to $75. We're about $10,000 effective at this point, and we decided to 3-bet to $250. This hand is slightly too weak. The solver likes to flat and 3-bet ace-7-6-5. It's not a big deal here though. I don't expect too much resistance from my opponent pre or post flop, so I don't mind building a pot even though we're out of position. So we're heading to a flop, 550 in the middle, 10,000 effective. It's a jack 9-5 board with bottom pair and a nut flush draw. I decide to check. This is the standard. The importance of playability at this stack depth while out of position is very important. So even if we had aces with a 5 and a nut flush draw, our hand would usually be a check unless we come alongside a backdoor nut flush draw or some sort of straight draw in case we didn't have a 5. It just shows also how important it is to have playability when building a pot at this high of a stack to pot ratio. And our hand is just default check call here. So opponent bets 400. I think this player is quite straightforward. So I do expect quite a few good hands here on the flop. Jack 9, Jack, 9, 9, but also some like kings and spades. Turn is a 9, obviously a really bad card, not only for my hand, but also for my range. He now boats up, and we're still in a lot of trouble against a hand like pocket kings and spades. So therefore, we are checking with the intention of folding. Our opponent puts together a couple of chips here, 600, puts them out, and we end up folding. In our next hand, we are in the cutoff, and we will face a couple folds before we are first in here in a moment. We're still playing a 2-blind game. Look down at ace, king, queen, 4, suited to the queen. A mediocre hand, but good enough to open in the cutoff. We're also blocking 3-betting ranges. We make it $100. The button folds, small blind makes a call, and the big blind throws in $75 additional dollars. Into the middle, $300 to go. And the flop is king 8-4, rainbow. So we flop top and bottom pair, no backdoor flush draw. Both players check. Decided to make a $150 bet here. We're trying to deny equity from backdoor draws in a multi-way pot. Our playability, if we end up 3 ways on the turn, is quite marginal. So I really don't mind folding out here backdoor flush draws, especially given that I don't have a backdoor flush draw myself. The small blind makes a quick call and the big blind folds. We're heading to a turn, which is the 7 of clubs. Now 5-6 completes. I'm also beat by king 7 and king 8, pocket 8s. So I do check back, which is quite natural. Trying to keep the pot under control. River is great, obviously a king. Now, my opponent still has king X in their range, as well as 8-8 and sometimes 4-4, some 5-6 straights. So if my opponent doesn't have a big hand like a straight or trips, he's not going to call anyway. So I decided to size up here and really polarize myself by betting full pot, $600, trying to make him call a hand like ace-king, 5-6, or a lower full house. Opponent makes a quick call and actually shows down pocket 7s. So we end up rivering pretty nice cooler, and we take down a nice $1,800 pot. So in our next hand, we are now in the straddle. We're switching up or increasing the stakes to 25, 25, 50, which usually happens in the process of every night because people get deeper and there's more willingness to gamble as well. See a button open raise for $200 and a call in the small blind. We have a trashy hand and should actually make a fold here, but I decided to call and give some action. Our hand should be double suited or better connected to justify the call. Let's have a look what the flop brings though. 4-4 deuce rainbow, not much for us. This could be a reasonable board to lead actually for my range. If you think about the button RFI range, small blind cold calling range, they shouldn't connect with a 4 as much as myself. Turn is a 5. Now we did turn some straight blockers holding 2 3s. We have a gutter, a 6 gives us a straight, and we have a couple of full house outs. So I decided to go for a $250 bet. I think this is a little bit too light. We want to have a spade blocker to generate more folds, or just generally more equity, potentially a deuce or a 5, some sort of blocker effect in play. The 2 3s do have blocker properties, but I think to justify building a pot and barreling quite a few rivers, want to have a slightly better hand. Anyway, we get called by the button, who probably is going to have a lot of overpairs at this point. Maybe some of them come along with a flush draw. The river is a 5, and now I'm basically going to play my hand the same way than if I had a straight. Ace 3 or 3 6, I think, are both strong hands here and strong enough to bet. Our opponent can call with an overpair. He can have an overpair with a 4 or a 5, which obviously loses to 3 6 and ace 3. So we come out firing $800. I don't love it in hindsight, but I think the bigger mistake was to bet the turn. I think we want to have a slightly better hand there. I think it's reasonable to lead also the flop on 4-4 deuce, even though our hand is quite trashy, but the board does actually perform really well for the big blind's defending range / the straddle's defending range. Our opponent goes into the tank for quite a while before eventually making the fold. In our next hand, we raise up King, Queen, Jack, 9 single suited in early position. We're playing now a 3-blind game, 25, 25, 50. We make it $200 and we get a bunch of callers. In fact, 4 callers to go. And we're heading to a flop 5 ways with $1,000 in the middle. The flop comes down 8-4-4 with 2 spades and we flop nothing. So we make a check and the entire table checks around. The turn is the 5 of spades, and we still have absolutely nothing, not even a valuable blocker, so we check again, and the entire table checks once again. The river is the 4 of diamonds, and now trips are on the board. I can represent aces and kings the best because I'm the initial raiser. This is a move you got to be a little bit careful with and think about table image as well. But I felt like in this case, it was a decent spot to go for a steal. So I bet $600 into 1,000. Hoping to make weak full houses and flushes and straight fold. And in fact, we do get a fold from the straddle who announces he had a straight. And because of that, I will end up tabling my hand, showing the bluff and taking down the pot. So in this hand, we look down at ace, jack, 10, 9, suited to the ace. This is a very nice hand. We are first in and decided to make it $200. Now the player on the button who I've won quite a few hands against so far and has been very active and potentially tilted makes it $700. He doesn't have too much behind, maybe $1,500 to $2,000. So we decide to make a call here. Even if my opponent does show up with aces, we have a good amount of connectivity in an ace-high suit to outdraw that hand class. But I have a feeling that this player is actually quite wide. Flop is A7-3, not my favorite flop, but as you can see in the graphics, he only has 1.4k behind. Takes his time, but ends up putting all the chips in the middle. And top pair is not a hand you can generally fold if the stack to pot ratio is only 1. In fact, most of the pairs should usually call. Here's a little bit dicey because if he does have aces, we're in very bad shape. Even against ace-king, we're not in great shape. But this player has been 3-betting a wide range of hands, so I don't think we have a chance. Or an option, we have to call this hand off and hope that we're good. We make the call. He asked me if I have a flush draw, which makes me worried that he might have aces. We run it 2 times. The first one, we hit a jack and an ace, so we have the nuts. So we know he doesn't have aces. The second one is a king and an eight, not completing the flush draw. And actually, we end up scooping the entire hand. So I assume my opponent had some sort of flush draw combination, maybe pocket queens or something along those lines. But pretty nice to win both sides of the pot, basically, and scoop a nice pot. We look down at 5-4-4 deuce. Obviously not a stellar hand. We are in the straddle. Or actually, in this case, we're in the big blind for $25. And we do see an MP limp, button limp. We over limp for another $25. And the straddle is going to check. So we're heading to the flop. Four ways, 225 is in the middle. And the flop is very good. Ace 4 deuce. We flop the set and a straight draw. And I come out leading because when someone has an ace in this case, oftentimes people just check back on the flop. But the players in the hand, I think, would actually call with an ace against the bet. So I'm actually performing better by just leading out and collecting a bet here from an ace that could potentially check back. We do see now the player in seat 1 calling. Again, this player has been losing quite a few hands and also had to reload so far over the course of this night. So I suspect that this player might be a little bit tilted. Button goes ahead and folds, and we head up, or we're heads up now to the turn. Turn is an amazing card, the 3 of clubs. So now we turn a straight. We also have a straight flush draw, and we still have that set. I don't really want to make an ace fold too frequently, or especially two pair like ace deuce, ace 3, ace 4. So I go ahead and bet 300. I don't want to pot it in this case. And if my opponent does have a flush draw, ace x of clubs, for example, he gets a good price to come along. He makes the call, and the river is a 3. So now we have a full house. This player limped in early position. He could have pocket aces, but we can't be afraid of that right now. He has been limping so many hands. We're trying to collect now a bet from a hand like a straight, but also possible hands like ace 3, for example, or pocket deuces. I think check raising is an option, but on the other side, I don't want ace 5 or 5-6 to check back. He is visibly annoyed with the bet because he has been losing quite a few hands against me specifically this night. Ends up making the call. We table our pocket fours, and he actually had ace 3-5 in this spot. So he flopped the nut straight, or the straight in general, the only straight, and then rivered a backdoor full house, which is no good against our pocket fours. We take down another nice pot here, cooling our opponent. In the last hand of the night, we pick up ace, queen, queen, ace, a beautiful hand in the big blind for 50 actually. We see a raise to $200, and it is from seat 1. We make it 650 to go. Again, this player at this point has been raising a lot of hands and is giving a ton of action, trying to regroup his winnings. Makes the call, doesn't have that much behind anymore. We're heading to a flop here in a moment. It's 650. The dealer collects all the chips. And we have a $1,350 pot, 1.8K effective. The flop is not great. Jack, 6-5, 2 diamonds and 1 heart. However, given how short my opponent is, an overpair of aces here has to go with the hand. If we would be slightly deeper, we could consider a different course of action. But given how shallow the stack to pot ratio is, the only move here is to pot the flop and go with the hand. Our opponent contemplates his options, seeing the pot size bet. Now, we actually are hoping he folds because we don't have any redraws, no flush draw, no straight draw. So almost anything he will call will have a lot of equity unless he has precisely pocket kings. But even if he just has a naked pair, he's going to have so many 2-pair outs, potential backdoor flush draws and straight draws. He goes all in, we make the call. This time he wants to run it one time only. And we table our hand in advance. Ace, ace, queen, queen. The turn is the 2 of hearts, and the river is the king of clubs. My opponent is left shaking his head. And we run pure tonight as we do scoop another pot for a successful night here at the Aria, playing some high stakes PLO cash. And this concludes the first episode of my high stakes PLO vlogs. I'm already back in Austria as I'm playing the WSOP online on GG Poker, looking to win an online bracelet in Pot Limit Omaha. And I'm also going to be traveling for the rest of 2022 2 different live stops. I will be heading to the King's Casino to play the big wrap. Then afterwards, I will travel back to the US and play some Poker Go high stakes PLO tournaments. There's a 25K as well as some Bellagio high rollers. And I will make more footage about that as well. Then I'll come back for WSOP Europe in the King's Casino before heading to EPT Prague by the end of the year / in December. Now, I do want to record more of these vlogs, and I also want to include some B-roll footage, some proper intros and outros. But as I'm moving along, I will improve on that and also make those more enjoyable to watch. What I would really appreciate is if you guys can, first of all, hit the like button if you do enjoy this video, but also let me know in the comments if this video had too much strategy to it and you want to have a little bit of a snappier video with more hands but less strategy, maybe more intro, outro, B-roll footage, or if you actually appreciate this level of insight when it comes to PLO strategy. Would appreciate this feedback very much down in the comments, and we'll see each other in the next episode. This has been JNandez, over and out until the next time.